like for me, the elevation is not in the materials that you use, and the elevation is not in how much money you have. It's in finding the beautiful, simple, elegant solutions that can bring something really simple, like a cutout, a cutout ballerina on a stick, to your own little mini automaton, who suddenly, now there's movement and there's dance and there's music and there's a story being told.
Welcome back to Puppeteers. We're your hosts, Adam Kreutinger
and Cameron Garrity.
And today we're talking to Jamie Bell. Welcome to the show, Jamie.
Woo.
Thank you so much. This is so exciting.
Yes, so we've known Jamie for a number of years now. We first met at the National Puppetry Conference, and is just a wonderful artist with roots in Zimbabwe, currently working now in London, does some wonderful work creating high art out of low-tech materials, and we're just going to talk all things puppetry today. So Jamie Bell, welcome to Puppeteers.
Thank you so much. I am super honored.
It's great to have you. Before we get too into it, though, is there anything you're working on right now?
Yeah, I mean, funny that you say that. I literally just came back from a very long rehearsal for a show that I don't want to call it a band. We're more like a sort of cabaret troupe of women, and we're going to Brighton Fringe next week, Thursday, and our show is full of glorious recycled puppets of varying levels of bizarreness. So yeah, that's what we're doing. We're heading over next week to Brighton. So it's only in a few days.
And you said these are for live performances?
Yes. Yeah.
Great.
So we've kind of just compiled a show. We do, all of our work is kind of centered on sort of women and women's things. And we've made a show called Her Story, which is, we've kind of plucked a few of our favorite strange women from history, and we've decided to call them musical portraits, for want of a better word, because it's so chaotic and bizarre. We're not quite sure what it is. But we're just sort of putting together songs. We write our own music. And being the puppeteer in the group, I'm sort of going, I want to put puppets here, and I think I'll put them here, and I think it would work really nicely here. So,
yeah. What kind of venues do you guys perform in?
All sorts. We kind of gig around London in various different sort of smaller theatres and theatre bars and things like that. We did Edinburgh Fringe last year, and we're doing Brighton Fringe this year, and Rada Festival in June, and Edinburgh Festival in August. So kind of a year of festivals for us, because one of our team is Australian, and she may not get her visa. So we've basically just been hitting the circuits as much as possible to try and drum up some work for her so that we can keep her in the country.
Yeah.
Before we leave the European Union.
That'd be great. Oh gosh, what a mess. No, so you mentioned being the puppeteer in this group. Was that something that you kind of had to convince your castmates of wanting to do,
Not
or
at
is
all.
it okay? What
No,
was
not
that
at all.
process like? Yeah, could you describe that?
It's kind of, I think that cabaret lends itself so naturally to, I mean, cabaret and puppetry just live in the same universe. I think there's something amazing about cabaret where you say the things that we don't usually say. You say the things that we're not allowed to say. And I think that one of the magic things about puppetry, sorry, I'm losing you here. Hang on, here we go. One of the magical things about puppetry is that the puppets can say the things that you can't say. So that kind of collision, I think, politically makes a lot of sense. And because our work is quite political, it's quite, I don't want to say it's risque, it's not at all. It's uncomfortable for some people. And the idea of bringing puppets into the mix just made a lot of sense visually for us. We like to do a lot of kind of flat Victorian style paper puppets, automatons, very, very kind of illustrative kind of stuff. And I said to the girls, I sort of said, here are some sketches. What do you think? And they said, yeah, let's do it. So, yeah, Yeah.
Awesome.
Are you the only puppeteer
smooth.
within this group?
Yes. Well, I think I'm the only person I would call a puppeteer. But I think that everyone that I've met, if you hand them a puppet, they become a puppeteer. I think it's such a natural impulse for humans to see puppets and to want to animate them. And in that sense, I sort of feel like everyone's got a puppeteer in them. It's just waiting to be accessed and awoken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice that they have you for that journey too, to guide them, because sometimes people try making that kind of a choice without any experience, which is totally fine. But I think having someone like you there to help guide them and show them what it can be just gives it that much of a step forward from a starting point for them. So that's great.
Well, it's been. I mean, we usually do. I mean, all of our stuff is made out of. And I was just telling Cam the other day, and I think I did it at the O'Neill as well. Very much. All the stuff that we use is like paper and cardboard and newspaper and sticks and sort of whatever you can get your hands on. But being able to see potential in materials, I think, is something that as a puppeteer is a really valuable skill, to be able to see a piece of paper and go, I mean, it could be anything. It could be anything, name it, and you can craft it. So I guess in that sense, having the confidence to be able to say this is absolutely a puppet, I think that's probably been more valuable for them in their process as they're moving forward. Yeah.
Now, do you think finding that sort of courage in creation lends itself to being able to pick out these sort of unique or obscure individuals from history to create a story like her story? Because I feel like there's a lot of puppeteers we know who are able to create these very unique stories that can really only kind of work as puppetry pieces. So what, I guess, besides the fact you being a puppeteer, was the fact that you wanting to tell this story about these obscure women from history, do you think puppetry allowed you guys to maybe make that job easier?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that the nature of the kind of work that I do perhaps lent itself more to our concept, because I work a lot with shadow and I work a lot with paper and drawing. And in that sense, the show is very much about kind of women being documented over time. So, I mean, all of the props in the show are made out of newspaper. All of the costumes are made out of newspaper, because we really wanted to work with this idea of two-dimensional documentation and how women are passed down in history in sort of a written form as opposed to the oral storytelling tradition. So I think that the flatness of shadow work and as I said again, the kind of Victorian style of presentation works not only well with the particular women that we've chosen, because a lot of our interests lie in sort of medieval representations, and I should say medieval representations of Western women. We're all sort of, everyone in our band. I'm a white Zimbabwean, and Stephanie is a white Austrian, and Rory is a white Australian, and Izzy is a white English woman. So in that sense, we've got quite a specific focus, which comes from my own feelings about representation and not wanting to tell the other story. And so in a way, finding a way that the puppets can do that, that they can carry part of the story for us, that we don't necessarily feel comfortable speaking on behalf of obviously women of color who have been in so many ways eradicated from documented history. So in a way, using the puppets was perfect this time around to try and get that element of the story supported. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, and I don't. As I was saying the words that made that question, I don't know that I understood exactly what I was asking, but but yeah, no, I love what you just said. That notion of being able to allowing the puppet to extend beyond what the
Mhm.
actors and the storytellers are able to do, and being able to put some of that responsibility in them, because that representation question is such a
Mhm.
hot topic right now, now more than ever. So
How do you go
Mm.
about finding the information and facts on those people, since they were so not documented?
yeah.
Yeah. Reading, and a lot of reading, and a lot of sideways reading. Sort of going. The internet has not been very helpful. It's been sort of one of those cases where we've legitimately, been asking people. We've been very lucky. Thank you, Rada, because Rada has a phenomenal library that we've been able to access, and we've gone through the British Library. We've gone through interviews. We've been able to work with some phenomenal people who have been able to provide us with the kind of information that you just don't get on Wikipedia. And then you go through that process of, I love it, Amanda Palmer calls it the art blender. And it's this concept of how much of real life do you put into the art blender, and how long do you blend it for? So how far do you abstract the real stories in order to kind of make them a universal experience? So we've gone from the very specific, so talking about, we have little narrations that talk about the women's lives and things, and then we go completely the other direction, which is the music, which is, I think, in a lot of ways very abstracted, and it's very weird music. It's not it's not music you'd like to sort of sit at home and listen to. It's quite uncomfortable, and there's a lot of discord, and it's sort of a very dystopian sound. But we kind of do our best to sort of match the sound with the information that we have, which is, I think, will be an ongoing experiment.
You know, it kind of reminds me of, because recently I've been getting involved with our Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators group, and one thing that's interesting about that is there's many different genres of books, but two of the main ones that I've been noticing lately is, of course, fiction and nonfiction. And in the context of children's picture books, it's just so interesting to be able to still find enough information for a nonfiction story, find enough information on something obscure like you're talking about, but still being able to weave that into a narrative that's compelling for your audience.
It's, and I think we found that particularly because, I mean, some of these women they're so specific. I mean, one of them is Elizabeth Bathory, who was a countess of Hungary, and she was originally, the rumor goes that she was the inspiration for Dracula, because she is she is noted as being the most prolific female serial killer of all time, and she has this, I mean, a rap list longer than your arm. She apparently would kill her servants, hide them under her couch, and then continue to feed them as if they were still alive. And there was these rumors that she conjured storms full of cats that would then go and torment her enemies. And it's just the way that a woman in power, who by all means was not necessarily a good person, we think that ultimately the point was that she was in charge of running things when her husband was away, at war, I believe it was. And she had a fearsome reputation, and her servants didn't like her because she was strict. She ran the estate like a total dictator. But the rumors began, and they kind of got larger and larger and larger until she had all of these charges laid against her, officially, legally, and she didn't have a trial. She didn't get to go to trial. They sentenced her immediately, and so it then led on to 300 or 400 years of kind of the story growing, and we have this Dracula image of the blood-sucking woman who would kill young girls to access their youth, and it's stories like that kind of grow into demonized and mythologized women in history who never really get a fair say.
Or didn't deserve it in the first place.
Or didn't deserve it in the first place. You know, it's kind of, yeah, I just find them fascinating, and the fact that we still draw on them today in popular culture. They're very much images that we play with today. Yeah.
No, that's incredible. Yeah, and that probably then makes it helpful again for you as a theater maker, creating something that has that accessibility for the audience, that it's not
Yeah.
just, randomly selecting, 4 or 5 people from history, but it's this still it would have still applied to this day anyways, but the fact that it led to contemporary characters that we still, refer to all the time.
I mean, absolutely. Part of our hypothesis was going into it, seeing how how far things have changed, uh, and not much. I mean, it's been one of the most interesting things is thinking about the stories of these women hundreds, sometimes even thousands of years ago, and the little structures that were beginning to form that have just grown and grown and grown and solidified over years, and you kind of see just how much work there is to go
Yeah.
before any of these things really break down. And what better way to challenge those things than puppets? Because how do you attack a puppet? How do you pin a puppet to a wall and say you can't have those opinions? It's just magic. It's magic. Yeah, very, very useful. Our puppet friend.
Absolutely.
So what brought you to theater making in the first place?
I believe it was Cats, the musical.
The musical Cats?
The musical.
Oh boy.
Stay with me. Stay with me, Adam. When I was about 7 years old, my mum brought me to London for the first time, and we went to see Cats. And I remember sitting in the audience, and Rum Tum Tugger came prowling through this. It was enormous, this huge, huge, huge audience, and he came prowling through. And I remember he looked at our row. He just kind of had this look on his face, and he looked at our row, and I don't remember thinking that's a man in a cat costume. This is hilarious. I remember thinking, oh my God, it's a cat. He's going to attack. I remember just being totally, totally convinced. Totally, I had no problems, believing that this was a world full of singing, dancing cats. And I know it's totally cheesy and whatever, but Grisabella broke my heart. Absolutely broke my heart. It was amazing. And from that day, I just went home and sort of said to Mum, I'm going to be an actor. And she went, lovely.
What
And
have
she
I
was
done?
convinced she was convinced it was a phase. And then when I got to the end of primary school and said I'm going to be an actor, and she went, okay. End of high school, college. Now I have a master's in acting, and she's still waiting for the phase to be over, I think. But it's just something that I've always known that I wanted to do for as long as I can remember. Making up stories has been the only thing I can do, really.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
just to go off that a little bit more, so that Cats is what kind of got you.
I can feel
Wow.
your judgment.
Sorry.
No one has ever said the title of a play with more disdain than I think just happened right there.
I'm sorry.
Let's be clear.
I'll tell you one thing. I love theater. I love musicals. I was like, Cats is just not one of my favorites personally. But anyway, that aside, to each their
No,
own.
me neither. Let's be clear, me neither.
Yeah.
But when you're 7, Adam, when
Yeah,
you are
sure.
7,
Yeah.
you got the lines and
Okay.
it's amazing. Come on.
But anyway, so I totally understand that, seeing this other world, in front of you in real life, got you interested in it. But there's probably other things that kept you interested in it. So to keep it from being a phase, as you said. So maybe what are some other shows that really inspired you? Were there shows you were a part of in this time, or even
just
things
experiences.
other experiences?
Well, that's what kept me in it. Particularly being from Zim, where all theatre and art is done on a voluntary basis. There is no such thing as funded art. We have a festival in Harare called the Harare International Festival of the Arts, Haifa, and it is probably, I would say, second to Grahamstown, is probably the biggest arts festival in Africa. And when I was very, very young, my mum is always keen to see local plays and local work that happens, because in Zimbabwe, when art happens, it's quite important, because I don't know why, it feels a lot more urgent. Because you have people making things off their own back, and you have people working, 2, 3, 4 jobs to keep themselves afloat in a crashing economy, and yet making art is still a priority. So we went to this show called The Two Presidents I Know, and it was extraordinary. It was a one-man show about Ian Smith, the previous president, and Robert Mugabe, who is now no longer our president. And it was the most fascinating show. I think it was the first time that I had really seen somebody take a risk on stage, that I had seen something happen on stage that had real life consequences. And the actor was led off by the police, and as far as I know, did not complete his set, and I never saw him perform again. And it was the most extraordinary experience, because it was the first time that I had seen anything that my government was afraid of. It was the first time that I had seen fear on that side. And I think something must have registered in me that I was watching something quite extraordinary, and that this magic thing called theatre was dangerous and inspiring, and could change things. And certainly where I grew up, it could change things. So I think that's probably what kept me there. I then started to do auditions and things for the Reps Theatre in Harare, and was very, very fortunate to get into a lot of shows there and do a lot of work with, again, all of these volunteer artists who were absolutely astounding. Kind of dedication and talent that you have there in such a small pool of people was really extraordinary. And it's them really that kept me in love with the theatre. And I can't remember ever not being enamored with what we do.
That's pretty amazing to me that you seeing this person carted away by the police was not a deterrent to you. I feel like that would be a deterrent to many other people, but it was kind of your inspiration, which is fascinating. It says a lot about even the work that you're doing now, I think.
I think that fundamentally my work will always be motivated by home. I think even at Eugene O'Neill, I mean, Cam and I, we talked about it quite a lot. The work that I did there it's all about Zimbabwe. I don't really know how to. Maybe it's a curse, or maybe I'm just never going to escape making work about home. But it is the most endlessly fascinating place, and it's kind of one of the only arenas, I think, that I have felt powerful when addressing questions about Zim, because it's been a dictatorship for so long, and because power is very complicated, because it belongs to one person and one person only, and suddenly with the theatre you take that from them, and when you are the person on stage who is telling the story, and you hold the story in your hands, the power shift is unavoidable. And it's kind of, I think I'd probably say it's kind of addictive, when you find that you are able to say things, even if you're on stage and you know that the police are waiting to escort you off. You have that hour to say what it is that you need to say, and I think that's extraordinary. Yeah. Extraordinary that we give each other that time and space, and we sit in a quiet, dark room and watch.
Storytellers. Yeah, well, and that they even allowed that hour to pass says something pretty extraordinary as well, especially. And I realize, your experience, you're describing something that happened years ago, but you think of now, the second someone sees something that they find offensive, they react in some way, either by responding to it or by removing themselves, and that's just a fascinating dynamic, and I could see how it could be something that was so intoxicating in the beginning. So how then did you sort of roll puppetry into this passion and desire to create theater art?
Again, sorry to harp on, but I think, as I mentioned to you, Pam, the other day, puppetry and mask work and playing with objects is such an integral part, I think, of Zimbabwean art making. Masks obviously have sort of deep cultural significance, and so in a way do puppets. Mm-hmm. The idea of the object being animated has always been really important, and so I've always grown up around it. Don't hate me, both of you. I never really liked the Muppets.
That's this guy.
Neither did I growing up.
Okay.
I didn't even know about him. I didn't even know about him really, other than Sesame Street. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that I didn't that was never kind of a part of my vocabulary. For me, I'd always seen kind of puppets as being very, very spiritual and very subtle and kind of deeply important. Not that the Muppets are not important.
Yeah.
But
I will say just real quick to even the playing field. I grew up on Andrew Lloyd Webber, so when you said cats, I was totally on. So anyhow, but going back to the not being drawn to the Muppets necessarily in the beginning.
I have come to love them. Mm-hmm. But so puppetry, yes. Let me go back. So it has always been something that I admired in local performers in Zim. It definitely, even dancers and tambuko dancers would use puppets, and it was hypnotic. But when I went to study in Hong Kong, I saw a Javanese puppetry piece performed in the center of town, and I think it must have just been the perfect collision of great artistry and obviously very intense spiritual significance. So when I watched that show, I was currently doing, talking about musicals, I was currently doing my dissertation in Hong Kong on Sweeney Todd. So I was talking about leitmotifs and things in Sweeney Todd, and I was nearly finished. And I went to my professor and I said, look, I don't give a shit about Sweeney Todd. I want to write about these puppets. So we scratched everything, and I started again. And I did my dissertation on this extraordinary art form with the beautiful leather shadow puppets and the whole setup being very meaningful and very precise and very disciplined. And that's when I really fell in love with puppetry and decided that I needed to understand more about this art form.
And just to confirm, this was when you were in college, correct?
So I went to what's called a UWC, a United World College. So it's the last 2 years of high school, but they're a series. I mean, there are colleges all over the world, and you have each sort of country that attends it. So they're represented by about 250 countries in each school, and it's based on this idea that like international learning kind of promotes, world peace and all that sort of stuff. So
understanding
that's why
of
I was
cultures
there.
and
Understanding of culture is generally a good thing. So that's why I was in Hong Kong. It was the last 2 years of high school. I went to Duke for college, Duke University, which is not the first place one would think of going as an artist, but the very small arts faculty that they have there is extraordinary. They're really extraordinary. And that's where I met Tori Bend.
Oh, that's right.
Who
yes.
You both know. I started making work with her in the States, which is kind of what sent me your way, I suppose.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting because I too went to a school that is very much not known for any kind of theater program. And what I always tell people is that I love that experience of having only like two arts faculty who really knew this thing, but it allowed me to have more of a one-on-one connection with the faculty. I don't know if you had the same experience, but you end up being able to sort of tailor that time to things that you really want to work on and strengthen, and is sometimes I wouldn't say better necessarily, but just you end up having something a different kind of experience than if you went to some sort of conservatory or something.
Well, I think that at Duke I had I was really lucky that I got to work with several of my professors in a professional capacity. So I worked with Tori on one or two of her professional projects, which were absolutely beautiful. She's an extraordinary artist. But you get to learn, I think, in a different way. Very much for puppetry specifically, it was very much embodied learning. She would take you through the design process and the build process, and you had to really get your hands in there to understand not only how a puppet works and how it performs, but why why do we use them instead? And she would often kind of challenge us with this notion of, why am I using a puppet instead of an actor? What is the difference? Why do we bother? And it was those kind of questions, I think, when you start to have to answer questions like that for yourself, you really start to think about who you want to be as a puppeteer and who you want to be as an artist, which was what Duke was very good at doing.
That's great.
So
yeah, and
grateful for that.
even once you're able to answer the question of why puppetry, then it's the question of why this style of puppetry,
Right.
which is sometimes a harder thing to answer.
Yeah.
So how did Tori obviously has a really wonderful aesthetic. Was that something that you were able to drive with? Did it clash with your own aesthetic, or what was that process of starting to collaborate with her?
I think her style makes perfect sense to me. She plays with scale and shape in a really unique way. I mean, her mind is just bizarre but wonderful. But I think for me, the magic was definitely in the shadows. The magic was in the silhouette and the things that you don't get to see, and how puppets in a two-dimensional space can give us kind of a different understanding of how the world moves. I remember one of the first pieces that I did with her was it was a very simple shadow piece with a scrim and a light, and it was set to Daniel Johnston's music. I don't know if you know Daniel Johnston. If you don't, you should. And it was just of an old man climbing up a series of objects to get to the moon. But because it was all done in silhouette, it was, I don't know, there's a kind of a magic to the shadow that you don't get when everything is presented to you. When you have lights on something and you have a beautiful, perfect object and you can see it move and you can see its mechanics. For me, there's a little more magic in the subtlety of what you don't see and the unknown. So I guess that's sort of what got me into shadows. And also, I will say, they're so easy. Like, it's so easy to do shadow puppetry. It is so accessible. Anyone can do it. You get a sheet, you get a light, you get cardboard, whatever it is that you have lying around, and you can suddenly create these extraordinary experiences. Yeah. I guess
I'd argue that for kind of almost any form of puppetry. Like the access point for puppetry is kind of achievable for anybody. But once you start getting up in that higher level of art and stuff, it can really get super complex too, which I'm sure you get involved in that as well.
Yes. Well, I mean,
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, not to. No. I was just going to say, not that was super complex, but the amazing workshop with Krupa was all about the nuts and bolts and how, as you say, it gets more and more and more complex, and you just kind of have to make sure that you can move along with it, I guess. Yeah. But that was what was so wonderful for me about the Eugene O'Neill, because I had never done work like that. I had never done work that actually forces you to sit down. You draw diagrams, you measure things. There's a beauty in that precision as well that I think I'm still learning about, I think. Yeah.
Right.
That is the beauty of puppetry, though, is that it can be as simple as you want it to be, and it can be probably one of the most complex art forms in the world too. So
well, and you touched on something in describing the shadow work that I think is both a strength of shadow puppetry, and also can sometimes be a challenge to creating it. Well, first of all, I'll say I like the idea when puppetry demands the audience engagement, which I think when you were saying it is just those flat images, you need to be putting two and two together a little bit more. You're not just looking at the number 4 in a sense. But because it is so accessible, I feel like sometimes you see shows that could have been a PowerPoint, and I'm not saying that of Tori's work at all, but I know I've put together shadow shows where it's like, oh, this could have been something different. So can you talk about elevating the work from that place that's accessible to something that, can really be considered like, theater that is stimulating in any kind of way?
I think for me, that work has less to do with the mechanics of the puppetry and more to do with your imagination and how you use it. I think that has to do with the sophistication of the story. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a sophisticated story, but I've been working, I actually have it here, something that would be considered a super basic shadow setup, right? So you'd have, sorry, I'm going to do something a bit janky here with my desk, but you have a scrim, you have a light, and you have a stage. And that's what one would say, right, so now we have what you've suggested has been sort of like a PowerPoint kind of presentation. We have a little puppet, basic little ballerina, like a little dancer. You make something as simple as a homopolar motor. Do you know what a homopolar motor is?
I do not.
Right. So it's when you have a battery and you have a bunch of magnets stuck to the bottom. And for me, I think imagining what this little puppet could do just leads you to finding really super simple solutions. And suddenly you have a spinning ballerina. And you put this behind a scrim, and you put it with a light behind it, and suddenly you have movement. And you have, not only do you have movement, you have independent movement. And I think creating landscapes that you can use your puppets to inhabit, you give them, not to sound too woo, but giving them a purpose, giving your puppets a way to live in the environment that you've provided for them. Does that sound too abstract? Does that make any sense?
No, yeah, no, absolutely. And I think,
like for me, the elevation is not in the materials that you use, and the elevation is not in how much money you have. It's in finding the beautiful, simple, elegant solutions that can bring something really simple, like a cutout, a cutout ballerina on a stick, to your own little mini automaton, who suddenly, now there's movement and there's dance and there's music and there's a story being told. And I think that's what's exciting for me, I guess, in the simplicity of the shadow work.
Yeah. No, I love that. And it's reminding me, we when I worked at a summer camp a couple years ago, we did this, you would have loved it. It was a retelling of Harry Potter, but using it was using like Muppet style hand puppets to do like the main characters. But none of the characters had arms because we ran out of time basically, and we had a shadow screen to the side of everything, and we allowed the shadows to be like the tiny details of what was going on, so you could kind of watch the shadows at the same time that you were watching the broad strokes of the Muppet style. But it concluded with doing a whole telling of Snape's whole backstory of his love with Lily and all this stuff, and we used the If I Can't Love Her song from the Beauty and the Beast musical, and it was like this whole blending of different things. But
amazing.
That's where, yeah, Adam, have I told you about that?
It just sounds like one of your fantasy dreams that you have, knowing all of Cam's interests. This does not surprise me. Is this something that the kids came up with?
And then Big Bird came out. And...
yeah, I was gonna say, is this something that the kids came up with, or is this something you forced upon them?
No. They wanted to do a Harry
Fulfill
Potter
my
show.
dream fantasy, kids.
But the reason I bring any of that up is just describing how it's that collision of the simplistic materials, and because it was all just file folders and stuff, with the complexity of the story of that J.K. Rowling creates, and the intersection of these different mediums and artistic styles. I think is a great opportunity, and the more that people can see how those things can come together is beneficial to the art form as a whole.
Absolutely. And kind of getting rid of the hierarchy, I guess, is important for me.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I fell in love with puppets, because there's nothing more humble than a puppet. As far as I'm concerned, I don't, it's the amazing Warhorse creations. It doesn't matter to me. I look at a puppet and for me, there's nothing highbrow about it. There's nothing looking down at you about it. It's full of potential, and anyone can fulfill that potential. It's just a matter of learning how to move your body with the body of this little creature, or enormous creature, depending on.
That's great. So then, as you're working or studying at Duke, and then I know we met at the O'Neill, but then what sort of came next? How did you get from that point to where you are now, doing these like cabaret type shows and things like that?
Well, I did after the O'Neill, I went home for a year, which was great. And then I applied for the master's program at RADA, which I completed in 2017. And that was quite an experience. And I got to do some puppetry there as well, which was great. It was a physical theater course. And our final show was based on the first 5 books of the Bible. So naturally, Jamie shows up and goes, "Let's do puppets." So I built a very small bunraku puppet, a medium-sized bunraku puppet, which was actually almost an exact copy of the one I made the O'Neill, the one that you shove between your 2 front toes, and then you can walk with them. And again, paper and newspaper and tape. But then, and I think I contacted you about it, I had to make a full-size puppet made out of K-Lite. I don't know what you call K-Lite. It's that white stuff that floats in the pool. Polystyrene?
Styrofoam?
Styrofoam. And that was extraordinary. We had, this room full of styrofoam, and we had a bunch of hand saws, and people were looking at me going, "So what do we do now?" And I said, "Now you cut some legs, and we see how it all works out." And the first time we built her, she was 6.5 foot tall. So it was kind of a brutal process of shaving her down. And at the end of the show, RADA got in touch with me, and they said, "What do you want us to do with this enormous puppet that we have sitting backstage?" And my flat is the size of a handkerchief. So I said, "Well, hang on to her and use her." And they said, "Well, unfortunately, we're probably going to have to burn her." It was just the most extraordinary kind of...
You can't burn styrofoam.
Right? But I just imagine this body, this life-size creature just being piled onto a thing of wood and just set aflame. I did not go and collect her, to my shame, and I believe she was burned. But I guess from there, it just made sense to start up a strange, weird group of singing, puppeteering people, because I don't know, cabaret is where it's at for me. the bizarre political nature of it.
So what kind of response do you usually get from your audiences for these types of shows?
I was wondering that too.
Mixed.
I can imagine.
We so last year we did the Ed Fringe, and our band is we sing about vaginas a lot, and I don't know how much of this you're going to have to beep out of your podcast, but we sing about a lot of things that a lot of people don't like to talk about, and some people find that incredibly funny and empowering, and they love it. Some people find it deeply upsetting and offensive and difficult to deal with. And some people find it incredibly moving. And Edinburgh Fringe last year was very much a mixture of all of those things. There was one night where we had one person in the audience, and he was the barman of the venue that we were playing at. And it came time for us to play, and we sort of said, there's no one here, but we're still going to play. And there was this incredibly burly Scottish barman with this huge beard covered in tattoos and sitting behind the bar. And we sang our song, Do You Love Your Labia? And by the end of it, he was whistling along and singing along. And he said, you guys have to come back next year. So at this point, we've stopped trying to predict it because I have no idea. And it's almost like every audience we get is completely different and it has a different response to what we do. Our only, I guess, we're quite cognizant of our responsibility to, when causing offense, I'm not someone who finds joy in causing offense for the sake of causing offense. I don't do it for the lol. But there have been difficult nights, mainly when our audience has been full of boyfriends and husbands and men and fathers who haven't really experienced being confronted with women who are saying a lot of difficult things that you would have to sort of take on and process, which has led to really productive conversations with people, but has also led to, as I'm sure you can imagine, lots of old white men leaving our theaters in disgust.
Do you do much with recording these performances or putting clips online? Because I could imagine there's a giant group of people online that would love to support this kind of thing as well.
We're so bad with with recording and actually engaging with our online communities. But we're hoping with this next year, because we've got such a long lineup, we're hoping to get stuff recorded, not only filmed but also recorded in the studio. I have a very good friend who's a phenomenal producer in Ireland that we're hoping to work with. So I guess that's our next step. Our first step was just sort of getting together and playing music because we love to do it, and we're kind of gaining more and more traction, and now having to think about what we actually want to do.
Yeah, no, it's funny because it's kind of like it's not uncommon to talk to people that are doing the type of thing that you're doing, as in live theater, and a lot of people kind of fight a little bit against making content for online or video because it's, in a way, it's such the opposite of a live performance.
Yeah.
But the way I've been thinking about it recently is thinking of it like a mandala. Are you familiar with like a mandala, like sand art?
Absolutely. Yes.
It's this beautiful artwork that is made with sand. It's dropped down, and then it's all like wiped away at the end. It's this beautiful art form. But the only way that a lot of people really know about it is through seeing videos and pictures and stuff on social media. So in a way, it's just kind of a necessary thing that not only in promoting yourself, but like I said, there's a whole ton of people out there that are advocating for the same things that you are as well, and they would love to probably connect and join you guys and join each other,
or at least know that there's safety in numbers in some ways. Like even if you never actually connect, but to know, I've thought about doing something like that, but I don't know if it's going to be well received. And to see other folks that are engaging and responding, and you're always going to have detractors and people who aren't happy with you. But
that's true. It does go both ways too. Yeah,
right.
Kind of coloring the ideal version.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Sort of, certainly being in London, it's completely changed my understanding of what we do as live artists, because the art scene in London is so fueled by self-promotion, online presence, good marketing is everything here. And it was really, really nice in for instance, in places like Harare or in Durham, where if you make a good piece of art, that word of mouth is enough, and you get that support IRL, right? But moving into the digital sphere has been, I only got Instagram like 2 years ago, if that. Twitter I got last year, and I'm still learning how to do all these things. But yeah, as you say, I've always you know, and it's one of the reasons why I don't do a lot of film. I've done more film recently, two film projects recently, but it's because there's something about the live performance that it is, and then it disappears, and it's kind of a had to be there sort of experience. And I also wouldn't be lying if I said a lot of the reasons why we haven't recorded anything until now is because our shows tend to be a hot mess. um, you know, we can barely get through a show without something going wrong, and it's in a lot of ways we totally have to trust our audiences, and it's something, it's a kind of a pact that we make in the beginning, that we say to them, this is fringe theater. We all have jobs. Like, we're making this because we love it, and we trust that you're gonna to meet us there, to show up for us. And I think that's not something that you can get from an online community. And sort of, as you say, there is a big risk in putting your work out there, sure. Because you don't have the same understanding, I guess, that you have with a live audience. But you're right.
That's the nice thing about online stuff. You can edit some of that stuff out too.
Yeah, you can delete people. That's great.
That's right, yeah.
As well. You can be like, no, go
Well,
away.
but even in
the video, like if something gets dropped, like maybe more so, rather than publishing an hour-long show, maybe you just do 3-minute clips of it. Or
we screwed up that song yesterday, so let's screw up the next one tonight.
Yes, definitely. Got to sort out being online. Got to stop being afraid of the internet, man. It's 2019. And I guess that's kind of what's been so great about watching Puppeteers grow in the way that it has. I mean, you guys have just taken off. And it's been really, really great to see you kind of collecting people from the puppet community and putting them in one place, which is amazing, because usually, like, we have to sort of find each other in the dark recesses of the theater world.
It's kind of the only way you can do it when you live in Buffalo.
Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah, we're a product of necessity.
True, but also I feel like just about, I mean, unless you're in New York or LA, it feels like sometimes everyone's the only puppeteer in their city, or one of two or three. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we're certainly really proud of what we're doing here, but yeah, anyhow, I don't even know how we got on that necessarily, but
where am I?
I also just realized that there's just been a butt hanging in my window.
Oh yeah, look at that.
I don't know if you recognize her.
Oh, is that from the Jim Rose? Yeah.
Yeah, this is Jim Rose's puppet, Jim Rose's marionette. When I had to go at him because I thought that all of his marionette models were too skinny, and he told me I didn't know what I was talking about, and I said, fair enough, you are Jim Rose. So I made this puppet, and he did comment. He was like, you've given her a rather big bottom. And I said, yeah. And he said, that'll probably affect the balance. And it's just a perfect response from Jim Rose.
That's great.
Yeah. No, and wanted to say before, when you mentioned me helping you out with some design stuff, that was just co-opting Jim Rose stuff, because I just sent you photos that I had taken from my time with him, and yeah, I take no credit to being any kind of puppet builder.
which I believe was exactly what I asked you for. I said, please, Cam, I need to know.
Oh yeah. No, for
Jim Rose's thing, because
right. Yeah.
No, but that was, he's just absolutely wonderful. I mean, the man rolls in with his rack full of marionettes, and you just think, what a master, what a master. Extraordinary. I'd love to, do that one day, be that person.
So you mentioned that there are times where things maybe go awry, or there are people who are, either inspired or it stirs something in them to see the kind of work that you're doing now. Do you have an opportunity to have, pardon me, any kind of either talkback sessions or do any kind of outreach, because this isn't necessarily, this is the beginning of a conversation, it's not the only part of the conversation. So do you have that any kind of outreach or way of keeping things going and moving along?
Yeah, I think it's very much it's a huge part of our ethos, kind of community engagement. A lot of our work is informed by testimonies of women that we speak to. After almost every show that we've done now, we have made an effort to go and talk to people about it afterwards. And we made a couple of extraordinary friendships at Edinburgh Fringe, where we finished the show, and our last song was a piece dedicated to Eurydice Dixon, who was an Australian comedian who a couple of years ago, 2 years now, after a gig that she was doing, walking home, was raped and murdered in a cricket field, and we had one of the members of our band is from Australia, and she had connections to this person through friends of hers, and decided it would be quite fitting to include her in our piece and write this song about her. Just thinking that it would be a nice way to close a show, and it would be a nice way to sort of acknowledge a fellow comedian, and to point out a lot of the hypocrisies of modern Australia. But at the end of the show, there was a young man who was sitting at the back, and we had said goodnight, and we had done the clapping thing, and we were packing all of our stuff, and there was this guy still sitting in the back row, and we noticed that he was in floods of tears and hysterical. I mean, he couldn't move, he couldn't talk, he was just sitting crying, and I went and sat next to him, and I said, "Is everything okay? I'm really sorry if it's our show that has upset you." And he said, "No, not at all. I just, my sister went through a similar experience with one of her best friends, and I don't think that I've ever stopped to think that it is really any woman. It is the any woman." And it's funny how unexpected things touch people, and that's why I think talking to people after your shows, whatever you do, talking to your audiences and finding out what connected with them and what didn't is vital as an art maker, because otherwise, if you're not making art for your community, why are you doing it? Actually, having said that, I'm sure many people can come up with an alternate answer to that question.
Well, sure. No,
I realized I was like very kind of, this is the only reason you make art.
That's interesting, though, because you are so well traveled, and you've talked about creating art in Zim and the United States and Hong Kong and now London. People in Ireland. How that must be a challenge, or is it to take your art that is so of you and deliver it to these different cultures? It's got to be, there must be some level of sort of recalibrating, or at least your own mental defenses. But how has that been as you've sort of taken your art from place to place?
Really interesting. And I think the most challenges that I faced were in America. It's one thing to want to tell the Zim, and I'm going to go back to sort of the cultural sort of significance of what I think I'd like to do. Doing that as a white African in America was a very different experience to presenting exactly the same work in London. And I think it's because, I'm starting to realize it's because your work always, whenever you present your work, you're always introducing it into a new cultural system that has its own lens. And I did some work a couple of years ago, wrote a play which also had puppetry and puppets in it, about the land reforms in Zimbabwe. So that when white farmers were evicted from their land, and often in brutal ways. And it was a very, very nerve-wracking thing to present, particularly in the South, in North Carolina. And I had to jump through a lot of mental hoops to realize, or to come to the understanding that my place of privilege in the United States is very, very different to what a place of privilege as a white person in Africa looks like, and indeed the place of privilege that a white person in London has, and certainly a child of the colonies in London, that carries its own kind of weight. So doing work here in London has been a lot easier because I think people are more familiar with the narrative. People are more familiar with why it is that I am white and from Zimbabwe. Whereas in America, it was quite a thing to have to sort of explain, no, I'm actually from there, and I do have these experiences, and these are things that I've lived through. They're not things that I'm co-opting and presenting to you because I think it's exotic and interesting. Yeah. So I think that's been, America was certainly the biggest challenge, and rightfully so. America taught me so much about my own position, I guess, in society, and where my art is able to be. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it's that level of code switching from place to place, right?
Absolutely.
You know, and that changes in small ways from, you know, working as a student actor to then, you know, working as in a master's program or professionally. But that's just a fascinating and something I'm sure plenty of people take for granted, and you don't realize it until you're in it. But that those things can change and impact the person, you know, the individual, as well as, you know, the audiences that you're working with and presenting to,
and making sure that, of course, you're presenting it in the lens that it is your experiences. Especially since, you know, some of the other shows we've talked about that you've done are, you know, doing research on other people in history, and so making sure they're, you know, it's clear, you know, what people are seeing. Because maybe if they saw both of the shows, I could understand why they might, if they missed something, think that wasn't your experience.
Right.
Especially in America,
right.
like you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were definitely many conversations that had to happen before and after I presented work in the States. And it was, I mean, it was extraordinary. I think that I don't think anyone is truly aware of their privilege until let me say this carefully. Coming to America will make you realize very quickly the things that you have taken for granted all of your life. And I think, particularly because I don't know if I can separate art and politics. I think in my head they're kind of necessarily one, because art and politics cannot be separate in Zimbabwe, and I think that's something that I will always be aware of now when I make art, and particularly with the work that I'm doing now with Polyclamorous, with my group, is that we take on English political issues, and then present them at very international global festivals. So it's yeah, I think being aware of your context is always important, and it will change, and it will probably change your art, and I can't help but think that's a good thing. I don't know. I'm still working that one out. So if you have any advice about that, please send it my way.
Yeah, as the two cis white guys from America, and we'll definitely shed some light on that. Oh,
shed some light. Tell me more.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll mansplain it to you after this.
That'd be great.
Goodness. So, Jamie, as we begin to wrap up here, we'll ask you the same question that we ask all our guests. In the spirit of Mr. Jim Krupa, and you yourself being a Kruppy, you know all about puppeteer stories, and wondering if you could share one of yours that you've had in your travels.
Oh God. I think it has to be the poor, gorgeous, hand-carved wooden puppet that I dropped in a performance of If My Feet Have Lost the Ground. And it was the saddest thing I think I've seen on stage. It was this beautiful old woman, and she was sitting in a chair, and all I had to do was elevate her, and she would just rise with the airplane, and it was this glorious moment. And she fell over, and it was just watching this beautiful, limp figure just kind of fall to the floor. And everyone, the audience, me, the performers, everyone looked down at her, and her limbs and her arms were all in all sorts of, oh God, it was awful. At all different angles. And I think that was the first time that I understood what it means to watch a puppet die. And I will never live it down. I will never live it down. I still feel bad about it, and I feel like she will never forgive me. It was awful for everyone involved.
Did the puppet also break as it reached the ground?
She didn't break. She didn't break.
Then what was the recovery? How did you recover from that performance, or did you?
You know what? There was a moment. There was a moment, and I just closed my eyes, and I remember swearing under my breath. And then I bent down, and I just acted like nothing had happened. And I went and picked her up and put her back on the chair, and I was like, I'm not getting away with this.
That's all you can do sometimes. Just wink at the audience too.
Hey, and it was and the show was so.
In case you forgot, this is a puppet show.
It was terrible. It was Tori. I'm so sorry. If she ever watches this, she'll be like, I remember that day. Yeah, no, it was terrible.
Still sending in the hate mail.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what's the best way for people to either contact you or follow the work that you and your group does?
Oh, you can follow us on at Polyclamorous. That's POLLYCLAMOROUS. Twitter, Instagram. I am on Instagram, but I'm only on Instagram as an illustrator. So if you're interested in seeing my drawings, it's Pippi O'Darrow on Instagram. Otherwise, like old school, send me an email. I like emails.
Is that via our website?
No, that's at my email address. And you have that you can put on the thing?
It is,
I don't know.
It is right over your face right now. So
excellent. Thank you. That's my email address.
Yeah.
And letters. I love letters. I'm not going to tell you where I live, but I love letters.
Oh.
They can send them to us, and then we'll forward them out.
Scan them, send them to you guys, and you can send them to me.
Send them to Cam.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Jamie, thank you. As we wrap up, well, we were gonna. We can
try. We can try.
Okay, sorry. We're gonna try something with your episode that we've not done yet, which is actually thank our Patreon patrons in the send off. So we're just stumbling through that for the first time.
How does one become one of those, by the way?
So you go to patreon.com/puppeteerspod, or if you're on our website, puppeteers.com, there's a button on that. And you just sign in. You could sign in with like Facebook or whatever. And you could support at either $1, $3, or $7 an episode. And you get different, different rewards and stuff.
And also for people who want to, you can do a one-time contribution on our website as well.
Yeah. So
excellent. I'm in.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. So how did we say we were going to do this?
I don't know. Just go.
Okay. Well, before
so like maybe like we thank you and our Patreon.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, Jamie Bell, thank you so much. And to everybody out there, thank you, our patrons who make this show possible. We're a small but mighty team, and we so appreciate the support of people sharing our page and our podcast, and
or becoming a patron at the low cost of $1.
Getting the episodes early and sending us all the feedback. We really appreciate it. And we appreciate Jamie Bell for coming on the show. It was so good catching up with you, and we look forward to see what you continue to do out there in the world of puppetry.
Thank you so much, puppeteers. You are fantastic, and I love your work, and I'm so honored to be here.
Absolutely. We'll have to have you back sometime.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
All right. That's it.
That wasn't too bad.
No,
it's a little funky.
We'll shave it. We'll shave it.
It'll work.
Yeah, the business of
yeah.